Cool, great stuff. So we're going to talk about debt and failure demand in public sector service design. And we don't mean financial debt in this case. We mean debt as a metaphor for working tactically in design, getting quick wins while saving trickier problems for later. John Wilshire did a really good session yesterday where we were talking about metaphor in design and economics, and this is very much in that space. So we're using Miro today, which is a digital whiteboard tool. Vicky's popped the link in the chat. Can everybody see that? Awesome. Is there anybody who's unfamiliar with Miro or can't access it? Great stuff. So I'm just going to share my screen just really quickly. Just to show you possibly the best way of using Miro in this case. So obviously you can navigate around the board. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about today that we're not going to get through, but we'll hopefully get through some of it. And the best thing to do is up in the right-hand corner here, there's a little navigation pane. If you want to just follow me through it, click on my icon, and as if I'm following Vicky right now, and then it'll just take you to where I am on the board. So great stuff. And just shout out if you're having any problems following it. So, okay, and also everything today is under Creative Commons license as well, share alike. So if you use anything, please just attribute it and continue sharing it. You know, for commercial or non-commercial purposes, it's all fine. So first of all, let's see who's here today. Either drop your names on the board or just shout out.
So I'm just coming out of the garden so I can say hello. I'm Simon Goff, and I'm actually a lecturer in service design. So hello, everyone.
You're going to introduce us to the bees as well, Simon?
Yeah, I will at some point. They're just about to release them, which is why I come out of the garden.
Great stuff. Also, Duncan, UX at University of Edinburgh. Great stuff. It sounds like you've got a really good UX team over there. Really good content designers.
We do indeed. Mark. We're very lucky.
Awesome. Hi, Mark. Hi, Beverly. Hi, Elise. Cool, great stuff. And also, you know, the whole domain of debt and failure demand in service design is massive. And so behold the ladder of abstraction. So this was a concept that was created by an American linguist called Hayakawa in 1939. And it's a useful model for talking about how we think and communicate in varying degrees of abstraction. So at the top here, we've got concepts, abstract concepts like design and economics and theories of them. I can tell you now that this is not my strong suit, although Vicky's pretty hot on it. And then further down the bottom, we've got more concrete ideas like the work we've done and how we manage it. Is there anything in particular that anyone's interested in talking about today? Out of these things on the ladder.
So I think what we'd say is, so the 3 post-it notes that we've got already, that's sort of some of the stuff that, you know, Dan in particular has been putting on, but this is an unconference. So if you look at some of the stuff and go, you know what, actually there's some extra things I'd like to add on, you know, even like right now, just based on the discussion, feel free to put them in. We will be keeping this free form. In particular, I'll be, you know, this won't just be a talk at you, but this is certainly the 3 buckets that Dan and I have got a whole load of stuff about. So this is just a chance for if there's other things that you as a group know about and you feel you'd like to talk about and it fits in these areas, feel free to put them on so we've got visibility as a group.
Yeah, and I should also say as well that I'm an unconference rookie. So when we were planning this, Vicky was like, whoa, you're not talking at people, we're unconferencing it. So please forgive me if I kind of go into presenter mode and just shout at me and say, "Shut up." Okay. So first up, what is public sector service design? So services help people do things, like these things on the screen: start a business, buy a vehicle, employ somebody. And this year, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is a sort of an arm's length body in the government, estimates that the running costs of public services this year is £456 billion, which is around 39% of public spending. So me and Vicky are user centre designers, and we each work on a very small part of that of that sector, I guess. And we advocate for users when designing services. We make sure that we identify and meet user needs and take an evidence-based approach to making design decisions using research and data. We work on multidisciplinary agile teams to do this. And that means that we work with user researchers, interaction designers, Vicky's an interaction designer, I'm a content designer, business analysts, product managers, engineers and testers. So as you can imagine, teams have a lot of different priorities and competing values. And one of the ways that we ensure all these values are upheld is the government service standard, which services are or should be independently assessed against at each step of their life cycle. So you might say that user needs are a form of value demand, that the problems that people need to use our services to solve. For example, I need to start a business so I can sell my crafts. I need financial support because I have a health condition that stops me from working. That's one of the services that I work on. And I need to buy a car so I can travel long distances to work and see my family. So understanding users and their needs is point 1 of the service standard. There's 14 points in there. So what about failure demand? In fact, has anybody come across this as a term, as a concept?
Is that the silence of no, that people haven't heard of it?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I haven't really. I mean, I've heard of it, but I've not had anybody really kind of talk about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, very nebulous term. John Seddon, who's an occupational psychologist, defines failure demand as demand caused by a failure to do something or do something right for a customer or a user. For example, I've applied for support. When will I hear back from you? Or you haven't taken all the evidence into account when you made this decision. Or more commonly, I don't understand this form. I don't understand this letter. I need to phone up and, call customer services. Seddon also says that any system's capacity is made up of value demand and failure demand. And the cost, therefore, the way I put it on that slide, I don't know if it kind of really is weighted that much, but there's certainly a lot of failure demand that I've witnessed working on services. And the cost of failure demand, can be quite high. So Implement Consulting Group, who are a Norwegian management consultancy, say that I did a survey in 2017 and they found that 68% of all contacts with organisations fall into the category of failure demand. And considering the UK government spends 456 billion on public services, I wonder how much of that is failure demand. It seems like it's a ripe area for design, to to recoup some of those costs and get better return on investment. But the costs of failure demand are just financial, of course. So here's a quote from my nan around 1994. He knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Of course, financial costs are only a small part of it. What about impact on people's health and well-being? What about environmental costs? So Gautier did a great talk on this yesterday, and we had a good discussion about it afterwards. You may be kind of moving from a paper-based form to a digital form and thinking about all the carbon emissions that you're saving by following that process. But actually, what are the carbon emissions of your new multi-cloud hosting strategy? What are Amazon Web Services and Azure and Google Cloud? What kind of energy consumption are they doing so you can run your CI/CD pipeline? It's kind of comparing apples and oranges, or even things that are even far more distinct. Can anybody think of any other potential costs?
One that I would just elaborate on with your people's health and well-being. It's not just people doing stuff. So I actually did some shadowing at one government department, and it was a contact center where 60% of stuff people were doing was, oh yeah, you want to change an address, I need to fill in a form, and then someone else will do it. And we got told that there was quite a lot of churn and people weren't very happy because their work just wasn't very satisfying, having to do a whole load of simple stuff that they couldn't even complete, and they knew was just not very well, not very sort of like well thought through from a process perspective.
I mean, personally, I mean, I one of the things that I kind of worked on a few years ago was the digital marketplace, when they had to change all their legal documents because they were too difficult for small businesses to basically engage with. And so I think there's a whole load of there. I know talking, I know you do content and interaction design, and it's quite interesting about how just the complex stuff like that is very hard to measure the impact on individuals and businesses, the stuff that's just really, really inaccessible, because how would you know what that's cost a business, those way of things.
Yeah, there is no way at the moment, no sensible way of being able to measure it, no way of getting data out of the majority of organisations, not least in government. Yeah, some really good stuff on there. At least put poverty caused by trap of under-supporting. Yeah, absolutely. There's also a poverty of knowledge of experience as well. The Economist had a really good article a few weeks ago about the fact that the majority of design is done by middle-aged white men. So the kind of poverty of representation in people's experience of what's needed, I guess, in design. Measuring lost opportunities. Yep. Job satisfaction for people. Processing failure demand. Yeah, massively. And I'll talk about that in a second. And yeah, resources and constraints on service teams, which kind of, ties into that. Duncan's just putting opportunity costs of not doing whatever else you'd be doing if not for failure demand. Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, here's a typical example, from the experience of a content designer working on a service. We've got a bunch of design values and principles that we want to follow. We know what we want to do, but there are a whole bunch of constraints, not least the effects of failure demand. And we kind of go through that constraints filter in order to see what's actually feasible, what's technically feasible, what's feasible within the constraints of policy, and what's legal, of course, and then what's I guess, viable in terms of the budgets that we're all working with. So we end up kind of with a what can we do mentality instead, which is frustrating. So does anybody recognize this situation? Does it sound like a familiar scenario? A business gives you a problem to work on. It's urgent. It's causing some problems in live right now, and it needs fixing straight away. You ask your product design team to take a look. They do some analysis. Hopefully they do some research. And they tell you, actually, it's a symptom of another problem, a deeper one. But there's no time to do what we might do usually, or we might advocate for in design, a 5 whys analysis, or carry out the scale of research that something needs. It needs a quick fix. So we call this kind of work tactical. Is this familiar to anybody, kind of working tactically? If I had £1, I guess, for every time I'd been asked to do something tactical, I'd be sitting on a beach somewhere. And tactics, are fine, great, even if they're part of a strategy. But often there isn't really a strategy, and they're not really tactics. They're pushing a bigger problem down the line to get a quick win, and they mount up as well. Often you're layering tactical solutions on top of tactical solutions. And, sometimes it's not immediately clear whether it's due to a previous tactical workaround or not, because things don't get documented. And we suffer from poor corporate memory, especially when we have lots of people and a high turnover of staff and teams. And when that happens, you have to go on a fact-finding mission. I do this often when I'm working tactically, especially if I'm joining a new team. What was the quick win that we were going for at the time? What was the deeper problem? What was the trade-off that had to be made, and why? And we pour through, documentation. We pour through systems like Jira, Confluence, Slack, and Miro, and talk to people who've been involved if they're still there, trying to get to the root cause of the problem. But it often takes more time than you've got. And here's a typical example from, working at pace during the pandemic over the last year. There've been a lot of constraints on user research, especially in the first few lockdowns. We weren't able to do any user research at all, which immediately put the brakes on what we could do in design, because we really lost that invaluable resource of evidence that we needed to base our design decisions on. So if we can't test and validate ideas through user research, how can we even build anything? So has anybody heard of the term technical debt? Yeah. Or tech debt. Mm-hmm. It's the scourge often of the user-centered designer. You might know it as, can you write an error message for this technical problem? And no, sorry, we can't build this seemingly simple feature until the code is refactored. But it's there for a reason. It allows technical teams to release quickly and get quick wins and push bigger problems down the line and back into the backlog. And, technical debt's a metaphor. So Ward Cunningham, who was the co-author of the Agile Manifesto, who coined the term technical debt, says that technical debt includes those internal things that you choose not to do now, but will impede future development if left undone. So, so it's very much a metaphor for explaining technical trade-offs to non-technical people, and using debt as a way of framing that. Is that, how does that sound? Is everybody kind of clear on that? Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah, no, that's a nice, clear explanation.
Cool. Yeah. So I did a bit of research kind of on technical debt, speaking to some of my colleagues in government working in engineering roles. And they said that technical debt is an issue type in Jira. Anyone can raise it at stand-up. So on Agile teams, we have like regular ceremonies, like a daily stand-up where everybody talks about what they're working on and any blockers that they might have. They also said the space in the team's capacity to do things outside the roadmap. We have a separate backlog for tech debt, then look at it in the prioritization of overall workload. And so they've got this process for it, and the product manager, who kind of is the boss, I guess. We kind of work a fairly flat structure on multidisciplinary teams, but the product manager's in charge. They're kind of like the voice of the user and responsible and accountable to the stakeholders. So the product manager prioritizes tech debt, but the team is empowered to handle it. So they said highly disciplined teams tend to avoid the complications of technical debt because they constantly refactor as needed. And refactoring means effectively rewriting, editing the code to iron the problems out of it. I spoke to a tester who told me about the test-driven development process that they follow. Test-driven development is effectively writing a bunch of tests and being able to scale up based on those tests. Every time you make a change to a service, you have to test the whole service over and over again to make sure you've not caused any problems. And they said that test-driven development isn't about testing, it's about design. It gives you the courage to write shit code because you will refactor it later. It's the opposite of measure twice, cut once. So I found that quite interesting, really. I thought really they've got a good process for handling this trade-off scenario that we don't tend to have in design. And Hirad Javed, who is a Canadian service designer, said when product decisions compromise the user experience, the result is UX debt. It's kind of exactly the same thing. And also, Nielsen Norman Group have written a great article on it as well, like the concept of UX, user experience debt. They said, like tech debt, UX debt is often incurred when designers and researchers are working under tight timelines or impractical project constraints, and factors include skipping usability testing, misinterpreting the product vision, and poor communication or documentation. So I had a bit of an idea, really. Could we create UX, user experience debt, and manage it in the same way as developers use technical debt? So just a quick check-in with everybody. Is everybody following this okay so far, or is it getting a little bit niche and nebulous?
I'm personally really enjoying it. It's making me think of all sorts of things. Yeah, it's great.
Cool, great stuff. I mean, just you feel free to just interrupt and chip in if you've got any thoughts or ideas or want to challenge any of this stuff. Martin Fowler, who is a quite esteemed engineer and sort of writer on agile software development, he kind of took the whole technical debt thing a step further, and he said that you can define different types of technical debt. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You can use it as a tool to your advantage. He said that often, like kind of going through this sort of quadrant on the screen, at the top right, you've got technical debt that's prudent and deliberate. You know that you need a quick win so you can keep your stakeholders happy, so you can meet a certain number of user needs, for instance. But you know that you're having to push another problem down the line. So can you do this sensibly and prudently? Release now and fix the underlying problem later. Fowler also said that can be prudent and accidental. You can't always plan for it, but do you have a fallback? Are you inside your sort of like your live service, listening, finding out what your users are doing and how they're using the service, learning from it, and are you iterating on that constantly? Fowler also said that can be reckless and accidental. You've got no idea that you've built that into your service, and there's no way of being able to deal with it. But worst of all, he said that can be reckless and deliberate. And I often see this on teams. You've got skilled people at all levels, at strategy level, higher up, and working on the ground as well, who say, we don't have time for more design at this point. We've got a deadline that we're working towards. We don't have time to do user research, or we don't have time to really make sure that we're building the right thing. So that's for technical debt. You know, could we adapt that for UX debt as well? So prudent and deliberate UX debt when we're designing services. We know that there are issues that are going to occur, and that's fine, because we're constantly learning from what we're doing and we're constantly iterating. So with known issues, can we document them, release, and then look for instances of them in the live environment, and make sure that we've maybe got process in place to be able to iterate on that as well? Can we make decisions on debt that is prudent, that are prudent and accidental? So we don't know for sure if this thing is going to work, but let's make sure that we're observing in live. Let's have a feature assurance process in place. That means that once we release a feature and push it live, we will revisit it 2 weeks or a month later and make sure that it's working as it should. And if not, fix it. And obviously, make sure that we're working iteratively. You know, UX debt can be reckless and accidental again. Bug reports come through from live into a huge backlog and don't get action for weeks. There's no design assurance process. But then also those debt decisions can be reckless and deliberate as well, as we've discussed. Quick and dirty, undocumented tactical solutions. So on the service that I've been working on in the last few months, we've been trying to follow the technical debt process for design debt or UX debt, because we don't even recognize design debt as a thing. Well, on the teams that I've been working on, but we do very much recognize technical debt as a thing. So could we just pretty much wholesale take that process and put it in place for design as well? So this is a screenshot of a ticket on a Jira board. And don't know if you guys have used Jira. It's kind of agile project management software that allows you to, manage work. And we've created a custom component called design debt, which means that when you've got a huge backlog of work and a big board with work at lots of different phases, you can filter it to show what work is outstanding and what is kind of like classified as debt. So like the technical teams, you then build some contingency or some time into your design process to be able to refactor your design debt. And that means that we can also think about iterating that and improving it at regular intervals. So what are the quick wins that we need now for this quarter? What are the quick wins that we need for next quarter? And is there any capacity within that part of the roadmap to build in some design debt refactoring? And what about later? What about next year? At what point can we really get to the root cause of the problem? And the impact of this is that, we've been able to learn faster, and we've been able to speed up and unblock the design bottleneck. I don't know about you guys, but I'm often being accused of being a blocker, because when you're pushing back and saying we need user research on this, we need to identify user needs, often that is not compatible with meeting a really tight deadline. So being able to manage debt better kind of speeds that process up and unblocks that bottleneck. It makes problems more tangible as well. And you're using a shared language with engineers and other technical roles and roles in delivery. One of the biggest problems, I think, on service teams is that you've got all these different languages, and it's difficult to really understand each other and have a shared understanding of what you're doing and why. And then also exploring techniques like doing feature warranties that I mentioned before. And what next? What do we need to do to make that happen? Because it's still very much a theoretical thing. We need to educate teams about debt, especially non-technical roles who aren't familiar with technical debt as a concept. So some of the stuff that I'm taking you through today I've kind of done with product managers on teams and designers and researchers. Make sure that if we're working on tactical solutions, it's always documented. One thing that we don't do is document things, and that's largely, I think, a result of the Agile Manifesto. One of the points in there says working software over comprehensive documentation, and really that's the worst thing that ever happened to design. So can we, build in documentation as a key part of our culture in design? Not least to support corporate memory. We mentioned before, often you've got a high turnover of staff on teams. When people leave, their knowledge leaves with them. How can we make sure it's there, documented, and supports a shared understanding across an organisation? Can we start doing hypothesis-driven design, which I guess is formally writing down our hypotheses and saying, a hypothesis might follow a sort of like a 5-line structure. We've seen that observation from user research. We think this is because insight from analysing that research. So if we work on this feature or iteration, we'll see a user outcome that we've identified from research that corresponds to the user need. And we'll know this is true when a bunch of metrics that we've identified in order to test whether our work has been successful. A lot of the time at the moment, we kind of do that in an informal way rather than a fully documented way. And then documenting that then supports being able to create documentation as you go. And then actually iterate for real instead of talking about it and having so much work on where it's kind of a once and done situation, that we can constantly revisit and learn and iterate things. So I might kind of like leave it there for the time being. I mean, obviously, I think conscious that I've batted on for the last 20 minutes. Maybe have a bit of a discussion about it.
So I think I'll start off with let people sort of collect their thoughts. I think something for me was interesting with, especially given the framing of this conference with like design and economics, the whole thing about debt and sustainable growth and choosing to maintain things as something which I thought was an interesting element, especially in the whole tech world of move fast and break things, and then you have to who's around to fix stuff later. So I think for me there's an interesting concept of even the whole thing about debt and and choosing to understand that these things are important versus just like letting it continue until it all breaks. That for me is interesting, I think, especially having been reading the Economies of Design book that was recommended as part of the conference.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, firstly, it was really, I found this really interesting. And thank you for all the stuff that you've gone through. Thinking about particularly services as kind of their own economies, and the things that you're talking about, like technical debt and UX debt, and all the other types of debt that may come with that, and the fact that you're basically managing a kind of a microeconomy in all of this. I guess one of the questions I have is, okay, then I guess things like agile development are almost a kind of an economic theory in this context. So how much do you think is agile methodology the wrong kind of economic theory, as opposed to maybe other things like lean, or just other flavors of how you might go about these kind of processes might be better in terms of understanding the economy of the design that you're working with, and how you could improve it? It's just sort of something that occurred to me when you were talking.
Yeah, I think for me I put in stuff like Kinefin, and I was thinking about Wardley mapping, and it's something to do with like how volatile is the economy, and agile is about when a load of stuff is emergent and you're having to figure out as you go along, and then as it gets more settled, then you move into the utility. So I think it's this, maybe there's these models about yeah, what sort of, when the economy is very volatile, how do you sort of manage that? And that's kind of what agile is about.
Yeah, I mean, in it, like agile's supposed to be like inherently fundamentally flexible. So when we say things like this, user-centered design is incompatible with the agile process, you know, it seems ridiculous because agile is supposed to be flexible. It's supposed to be able to accommodate it. But I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a really good observation.
I really appreciated this metaphor because I don't know that much about this UX design world, and I appreciated the language also. I got new vocabulary out of this, and it just made me keep going with the metaphor of debt in my mind and wondering, do any of these people who've written about it, or when you think about it, do you talk about like working on credit, or what's the interest that you have to pay on the debt? Like, can you take the metaphor forward, and what does that, I don't know what those would mean in practical life?
Yeah, totally, Elise. Yeah, some stuff that we probably didn't get time to cover was like underneath UX debt, you've got different types of debt as well. So design debt, Gav Elliott, who's one of the lead designers at DWP, said that it's deprecated components from a design system. Things that, you know, because we all try and follow the gov.uk design system, but sometimes if that's iterated, things that use things within that system get out of sync. We've also, like the thing we mentioned earlier on, you know, not being able to test and validate ideas through research, that's research debt. The example I showed you before about page title and path naming, that's content debt. And then, you know, we've got all these different, sorry for this diagram. You know, you might say design, content and research debt are all part of UX debt, which is part of product debt, which technical debt's also part of. But within that, that's one product within a service. What about service debt? And what about other things like data, for instance? You know, services haven't had data interoperability built into them, so they can't understand and share data between services. Or policy debt. You know, what about this policy that was written in 1976 that's no longer fit for purpose, but will take years of kind of legal wrangling in order to overhaul? So all of these things together, you know, kind of, you know, are created by and also nourished by failure demand. You know, it kind of becomes that sort of vicious cycle of when you're constantly working with debt, how can you then overcome it?
But if you think about debt as like, I'm indebted to somebody, or somebody has given me permission to borrow this money in the first place and now charging me interest on it, who are we borrowing from? Is it like the user that pays the final?
Yeah,
price?
I was going to say, to play with your metaphor, wasn't the extreme of debt is when you default, and the defaulting would be the service goes down, or someone really can't do something and it goes in the papers. And yeah, that for me is an interesting element about at what point does the debt default and it comes back to haunt you. And I think, yeah, there's a few different elements with that. Yeah, it is like the system just doesn't work. UX one is just certain people can't use it. And yeah, in some scenarios there can be, well, we always have things like reputational damage or actually getting fined. But yeah, I think that there is a thing of we were discussing this beforehand. Yeah, sometimes debt is in some economic terms, debt is useful. It means that you can kind of hide costs and not get charged for things. But yeah, when it tips, the debt becomes the default.
I was just going to, because what you were talking about, what Elise has also sort of brought up as well, this idea of kind of extending the metaphor and talking about, you know, credit and interest. When you start to have all of those components, then you end up in quite a complex decision-making space. You know, I'm just thinking in sort of agile teams, you know, who is responsible and kind of how do those people go about making those complex economic decisions around, you know, you can capture debt and you can keep, maybe even attach a value to it, but then obviously somebody has to decide what to do when in order to manage it in the best way possible. So I just wondered kind of who does that and kind of, you know, what decision-making frameworks do they have around that, I suppose.
Yeah, I really don't know who does at the moment. I guess it's kind of part of service design to a certain extent, to kind of like really have that end-to-end, front to back, top to bottom, micro to macro understanding of you know, how services hang together and then hang together at large. But yeah, I don't think there's any kind of roles specifically at the moment. Do you think of any, Vicky?
So I'm gonna sort of use my limited knowledge of financial things and metaphors. If anything, actually a load of the assurance things which is happening, say in UK government, sort of the standards assurance with GDS, I see them as the equivalent of regulators. So there are, you know, people that are supposed to come in and check and see what these debts are and make sure if, you know, if things are, if there's stuff which is just so glaringly risky that that say you need to fix this before it goes to the public. So I kind of see that, yeah, regulate, isn't it? That's what regulators are about, is stopping market failure. And I see that was the key point of a lot of the stuff that's been set up in UK government, having these people so that stuff doesn't launch and then yeah, the debt suddenly falls over and it's on the papers because people can't get paid for their for, you know, whatever they're supposed to get. But it's a very high level, and yeah, I guess it's an interesting point about that's an external group, but at a far more localized level. Yeah, should there be more people that should more people be thinking about this, and do they have the right knowledge to be able to sort of grapple with it all?
Yeah, I was just thinking when you're saying about that whole regulatory thing, is that that's quite a slow moving layer in all of this, isn't it, compared to what's happening in agile teams. So yeah, that more localized awareness of economics in this, I think, is quite an interesting thing.
I wonder if there's another way of thinking about this, which is, you know, there's a tension in sort of all aspects of life between kind of investing in new infrastructure versus maintaining your existing infrastructure, and you know, as people, we're kind of inclined towards the shiny new things, and everyone's very interested in building new stuff rather than fixing the plumbing or, you know, getting, you know, fixing past work. And that's kind of maybe how I think of this sort of stuff sometimes, is not so much debt, but it's like the maintenance work you need to do to keep it, you know, what you've built in the past running, which may often be, you know, you may often be more efficient at fixing what exists rather than building something new. But humans being humans, we just love the shiny new stuff. So that's how we end up in this kind of problem of spiraling to UX and technical debt.
Yeah, totally, Duncan. And we tend to build it in silos as well, don't we? Rather than thinking, how can we build this thing to integrate with that other thing? It's like, let's worry about that later. And by that point, you know, it's too late.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it? I'm conscious we're just on time, but I mean, that almost starts to get to your circular economies kind of stuff. But the little bit I know about it, I'm going to say the word and back off. But yeah, just economies that don't involve new things all of the time.
So thank you all so much for coming and joining us today. If you do get a chance, there's a little retro at the bottom of that of that Miro board that we didn't get into. Kind of, what was the big idea? What was the most important thing you heard today? What was the biggest surprise? And what one big question do you still have? So if you get a chance to fill that in, please, you know, we might be able to have some more conversations about it. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elise.
Yeah.
Thanks, Duncan. Great to meet you all.
Yeah. Bye.